Kato, an 8-year-old boy with a strong sense of right and wrong, always believed in protecting those he loved, no matter how hard it was. One day, on what was supposed to be the happiest day of his father's life, Kato makes a decision that changes everything. As he watches his dad about to marry Naledi, a woman who has been hiding dark secrets, Kato steps forward to reveal a shocking truth that no one could have imagined. His bold move stops the wedding in its tracks, but what happens next leaves everyone stunned. Why did Kato's revelation lead to such dramatic consequences? How did this young boy's courage uncover the truth about his father's fiancée, and what ripple effects did it have on their lives? Stay tuned to find out. And before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from today, and if this story of bravery and honesty resonates with you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. The sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows of the small village church, casting a warm glow on the assembled guests. The air buzzed with excitement as friends and family members, many dressed in vibrant African attire, chatted in hushed tones, their eyes darting expectantly toward the entrance. At the altar, Bekazizwe, Kato's father, stood tall in his crisp black agbada, a nervous smile playing on his lips as he waited for his bride-to-be. "You look great," Baba whispered 8-year-old Kato, fidgeting with the small pillow in his hands. The boy's dark curls were neatly combed, and his miniature suit matched his father's perfectly. But while Bekazizwe beamed with joy, Kato's brown eyes were clouded with worry. Bekazizwe glanced down at his son and gave him a reassuring wink. "Thanks, my boy. You're the best ring-bearer a father could ask for," he said, ruffling Kato's hair affectionately, oblivious to the anxiety etched across the child's face. As the first notes of the African drums signaling the wedding filled the air, the congregation rose to their feet. All eyes turned toward the chapel doors, eager to catch a glimpse of the bride, all eyes except Kato's. The boy's gaze remained fixed on his father, his small hands clutching the ring pillow so tightly that his knuckles turned white. The doors swung open, revealing Naledi in all her bridal glory. She glided down the aisle, a vision in white lace and beaded silk. Her braids were adorned with colorful beads, and her blue eyes sparkled with emotion. As she approached the altar, Bekazizwe's face lit up with pure adoration. "You look beautiful," Bekazizwe whispered as Naledi took her place beside him. She smiled back, her voice barely audible. "I can't wait to start our life together." The elder from the village began the ceremony, his words washing over the attendees, but for Kato, each passing moment felt like an eternity. He shifted from foot to foot, his eyes darting between his father and Naledi. To anyone watching, it might have seemed like simple nervousness, but there was something deeper, more urgent, in the boy's demeanor. As he stood there, young Kato found himself lost in memories of the past few months. His mind drifted back to the day his father Bekazizwe first introduced him to Naledi. It was a crisp afternoon when Bekazizwe had picked Kato up from school, his face beaming with excitement. "I've got someone special I want you to meet, my boy," he had said, practically bouncing in his seat as they drove home. Kato remembered how his stomach had twisted with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Since his mother's passing 2 years ago, it had just been him and his dad. The thought of someone new entering their lives filled him with uncertainty. When they arrived home, Naledi was waiting on the porch, her golden braids catching the late afternoon sunlight. She smiled warmly as they approached, and Kato couldn't help but notice how his father's eyes lit up at the sight of her. "Kato, this is Naledi," Bekazizwe had said, his voice filled with pride. She's become very important to me, and I hope she'll become important to you too." Naledi had knelt down to Kato's level, her blue eyes twinkling. "It's so nice to finally meet you, Kato," she said softly. "Your dad talks about you all the time." In that moment, Kato had felt a glimmer of hope maybe this wouldn't be so bad after all. But as the weeks passed, that hope began to fade. Kato noticed how different Naledi was when his father wasn't around. The warm smiles disappeared, replaced by cold stares and tight-lipped frowns. One particular evening stood out in Kato's mind. Bekazizwe had been working late and Naledi was supposed to watch Kato. As they sat at the dinner table, Kato tried to engage her in conversation. Naledi, he'd started hesitantly. "Do you like the stars? We're learning about the sky in school and Kato Naledi cut him off sharply, not looking up from her phone. I'm busy right now. Eat your dinner quietly, please. Kato had shrunk back in his chair, pushing his food around his plate. The silence that followed was deafening. When Bekizizwe was home, however, it was a different story entirely. Naledi would ask Kato about school, laugh at his jokes, and even ruffle his hair affectionately. But Kato could see the falseness in her smile, the strain behind her eyes. Bekizizwe, on the other hand, was happier than Kato had seen him in years. He practically floated around the house, humming to himself and breaking into random bouts of dancing that would have embarrassed Kato if they weren't so nice to see. Isn't Naledi wonderful? Bekizizwe would often say, his eyes twinkling. We're so lucky to have her in our lives. Aren't we, my boy? Kato would nod and force a smile, not wanting to burst his father's bubble of happiness. But inside, he felt increasingly alone and confused. As the weeks turned into months, Naledi's true nature became more apparent to Kato. She began to make subtle cutting remarks when Bekizizwe wasn't within earshot. Oh, Kato, she'd sigh at the mess he'd made while working on a school project. You're such a handful sometimes. I don't know how your father manages. Or when he'd excitedly show her a good grade on a test, she'd respond with, That's nice, dear, but you know there's always room for improvement. Each comment chipped away at Kato's self-esteem, making him feel like a burden in his own home. He began to withdraw, spending more time in his room and less time in the common areas of the house. One Saturday afternoon, about 3 months before the wedding, an incident occurred that Kato couldn't shake from his memory. Bekizizwe had gone out to run some errands, leaving Kato and Naledi alone in the house. Kato was in the living room, watching cartoons and sipping a glass of juice when Naledi walked in. Turn that off, she snapped, gesturing to the TV. It's too loud. I'm trying to work. Startled, Kato fumbled with the remote. In his haste, he knocked over his glass, spilling juice all over the coffee table and carpet. I'm sorry, he cried, jumping up to grab some napkins. I didn't mean to before he could finish. Naledi was there, her fingers digging into his arm as she yanked him away from the mess. Look what you've done, she hissed, her face twisted with anger. You clumsy, careless boy. Kato winced at her grip, tears springing to his eyes. I'm sorry, he whimpered. I'll clean it up, I promise. Naledi's eyes narrowed dangerously. You better, she growled. And if you breathe a word of this to your father, you'll be very, very sorry. Do you understand me? Kato nodded frantically, his heart pounding in his chest. As soon as Naledi released him, he rushed to clean up the spill, his hands shaking the entire time. That night when Bekizizwe returned home, Naledi greeted him with a kiss and a cheerful, How was your day, love? Kato watched from the stairs, rubbing his arm where Naledi had grabbed him, feeling more alone than ever. As the wedding drew nearer, Kato found himself struggling with the weight of his secret. He wanted desperately to tell his father about Naledi's true nature, but fear held him back. What if Bekizizwe didn't believe him? What if it made Naledi even angrier? One evening, about a month before the wedding, Kato finally worked up the courage to approach his father. Bekizizwe was in his study, going over some paperwork when Kato knocked timidly on the door. Come in, my boy, Bekizizwe called out, smiling as Kato entered. What's up? Kato hesitated, twisting the hem of his shirt in his hands. Baba, he began slowly, can I talk to you about something? Bekizizwe set aside his papers, giving Kato his full attention. Of course, my son. You can talk to me about anything. What's on your mind? Taking a deep breath, Kato blurted out, It's about Naledi. I don't think she likes me very much. Bekizizwe's brow furrowed in confusion. What do you mean, Kato? Naledi adores you. No, Baba, she doesn't, Kato insisted, his words tumbling out in a rush. She's different when you're not around. She ignores me and sometimes she says mean things. And slow down, Bekizizwe interrupted, holding up a hand. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Kato, I know this is a big change for you. It's natural to feel a little unsure about Naledi becoming a part of our family. But I promise you, she cares about you very much. But Baba, Kato tried again, but Bekizizwe shook his head. No buts, my boy. Naledi is going to be your stepmother, and I need you to give her a chance. She's trying her best, just like we all are, okay? Kato's shoulders slumped in defeat. Okay, Baba, he mumbled, turning to leave the room. Hey, Bekazizwe called out after him, his voice softening. I love you, my boy. We're all going to be just fine. You'll see. As Kato closed the door behind him, he felt a wave of hopelessness wash over him. His father, the person he trusted most in the world, hadn't believed him. Or worse, hadn't wanted to believe him. From that day on, Kato stopped trying to tell his father about Naledi's behavior. Instead, he retreated further into himself, becoming quieter and more withdrawn. He began to dread family dinners and outings, knowing that he'd have to pretend everything was fine while silently enduring Naledi's subtle jabs and cold shoulder. Bekazizwe, caught up in the whirlwind of wedding preparations and his own happiness, failed to notice the change in his son. He attributed Kato's quietness to shyness or perhaps a phase, never suspecting the turmoil brewing beneath the surface. Naledi, for her part, seemed to revel in her victory. With Bekazizwe oblivious to her true nature and Kato too afraid to speak up again, she became bolder in her mistreatment of the boy. One afternoon, Kato overheard a conversation between Naledi and her friend, Zola. I don't know how you do it, Zola was saying. Playing mom to someone else's kid? I couldn't handle it. Kato froze in the hallway, holding his breath to hear Naledi's response. Oh, it's not so bad, Naledi replied, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Kato. Well, he's part of the package, isn't he? You have to take the good with the bad. Zola laughed. You're a saint, I swear. If it were me, I'd have shipped the kid off to boarding school by now. Kato didn't wait to hear Naledi's response. He crept back to his room, his appetite forgotten, feeling like he'd been punched in the gut. Part of the package. The bad. Was that all he was to Naledi? An inconvenience she had to tolerate to be with his dad? As the wedding day approached, Kato felt increasingly trapped. He watched as Bekazizwe and Naledi made plans for their future barely considering how it would affect him. When they discussed honeymoon destinations or redecorating the house, Kato felt like a ghost, invisible and unimportant. One night, Kato tossed and turned in his bed, unable to sleep. The digital clock on his nightstand blinked 11:42 p.m., its red glow casting eerie shadows across his room. Sighing, he decided to get a glass of water from the kitchen. As he padded down the hallway in his traditional pajamas, Kato froze. A hushed, angry voice drifted from the living room. It was Naledi. Mandela, you need to listen to me, she hissed into her phone. Kato crouched low, peering around the corner. Naledi paced back and forth, her free hand raking through her disheveled braids. We can't rush this. Everything has to be perfect. Kato's heart raced. He'd never heard Naledi sound so agitated before. Usually, she was all smiles and sweetness, especially around his dad. The wedding is in 2 weeks, Naledi continued, her voice dripping with frustration. Once that's done, we move on to phase 2. Yes, the insurance policy. Bekazizwe doesn't suspect a thing. Insurance policy? Phase 2? Kato's young mind whirled with confusion. He knew eavesdropping was wrong, but he couldn't tear himself away. Look, Mandela, I've got it under control, Naledi snapped. Just stick to the plan. Once we get the money, we'll be set for life. No more scams. No more close calls. This is our ticket out. Kato's breath caught in his throat. Money? Scams? What was Naledi talking about? That brat, Naledi growled, causing Kato to flinch. He's too observant for his own good. But don't worry, I can handle him. Bekazizwe is wrapped around my finger. He'd never believe a word against his precious fiancée. Tears pricked at Kato's eyes. He'd always known Naledi didn't like him, but hearing her talk about him like this, it hurt more than he could have imagined. Just be ready, Naledi said, her tone final. 2 weeks after the wedding, we strike. Bekazizwe won't know what hit him. With that, she ended the call. Kato scrambled back to his room, his heart pounding so loud he was sure Naledi would hear it. He dove under his covers, his mind racing with what he had just overheard. Naledi was planning something bad, and it involved his dad. Money, scams, and some kind of insurance policy? Kato didn't understand it all, but he knew one thing for certain: his father was in danger. Sleep eluded Kato that night. He tossed and turned, replaying Naledi's words in his head. When morning came, he stumbled, bleary-eyed, to the breakfast table, where Bekazizwe and Naledi sat, the picture of domestic bliss. "Morning," Champ Bekazizwe said cheerily, ruffling Kato's hair. "You look tired. Rough night?" Kato nodded, avoiding Naledi's gaze. "Just couldn't sleep," he mumbled. Naledi's saccharine voice cut through the air. "Oh, poor thing. Probably just excited about the wedding, aren't you, Kato?" Kato looked up, meeting Naledi's eyes. For a split second, he saw a flash of something cold and calculating behind her smile. It sent a shiver down his spine. "Yeah," he lied, forcing a smile. "Excited." Over the next few days, Kato watched Naledi like a hawk. Now that he knew something was amiss, he started noticing things he'd overlooked before. Naledi was constantly on her phone, typing furiously. Whenever Bekazizwe entered the room, she'd quickly lock the screen, plastering on a smile. "Just chatting with the wedding planner, love," she'd say, or, "Oh, you know, bridesmaid drama." But Kato knew better. He'd catch glimpses of her screen sometimes, rapid-fire texts to someone saved as M in her contacts. Mandela, he assumed, the mysterious man from the phone call. Naledi's absences from the house became more frequent, too. She'd make flimsy excuses to leave, often for hours at a time. Just popping out to finalize some wedding details, she'd chirp, kissing Bekazizwe on the cheek, or meeting the girls for a last-minute dress fitting. Bekazizwe, blinded by love and preoccupied with work, never questioned her. But Kato noticed. He noticed everything now. One afternoon, about a week before the wedding, Kato was helping Bekazizwe in the garage when Naledi's car pulled into the driveway. She hurried inside, not even glancing their way. "I'm going to get a snack," Baba Kato said, wiping his greasy hands on a rag. Bekazizwe nodded, engrossed in fixing the lawnmower. "Sure thing, my boy. Bring me a soda while you're at it, will you?" Kato entered the house quietly, hearing Naledi's muffled voice from upstairs. He crept up the stairs, careful to avoid the creaky third step. Almost there, Mandela, Naledi was saying. She was in the guest room, soon to be hers and Bekazizwe's after the wedding. Just a few more days. "Keep your shirt on." Kato inched closer to the door, straining to hear. "The policy is ironclad," Naledi continued. "Once we're married, it'll be easy. A tragic accident, a grieving widow, and we're set for life. Just stick to the plan." Kato's blood ran cold. A tragic accident? Were they planning to hurt his dad? Suddenly, Naledi's voice dropped to a whisper. Kato leaned in, trying to catch her words. In his eagerness, he bumped against the door, causing it to creak slightly. The room went silent. Kato's heart leaped into his throat. "I've got to go," Naledi said quickly. "I'll call you later." Kato scrambled back down the hallway, ducking into the bathroom just as the guest room door opened. He heard Naledi's footsteps pause outside the bathroom, then slowly descend the stairs. Breathing heavily, Kato slumped against the bathroom wall. This was worse than he'd imagined. Naledi and this Mandela person weren't just after money, they were planning to hurt his dad. Maybe even. Kato couldn't bring himself to finish the thought. He had to do something. But who would believe him? His dad thought Naledi hung the moon, and Naledi had made it clear that she could twist anything Kato said against him. For the next few days, Kato was on high alert. He watched Naledi's every move, trying to piece together her plan. She was careful, but sometimes she slipped up. One evening, Kato walked into the study to find Naledi, hurriedly closing Bekazizwe's laptop. She jumped when she saw him, a guilty look flashing across her face. "Oh, Kato," she said, her voice overly bright. "You startled me. I was just checking some wedding RSVPs." Kato nodded, not believing a word. As soon as Naledi left the room, he went to the laptop. It was locked, but Kato knew his dad's password. It was Kato's birthday. The browser history had been cleared, but one tab remained open, the website for a major life insurance company. Kato's stomach churned. This must be the policy Naledi kept mentioning. He was about to dig deeper when he heard footsteps approaching. Quickly, he closed the laptop and pretended to be looking at the bookshelf. Bekazizwe walked in, smiling when he saw Kato. "Hey, sport, what are you up to?" "Just looking for a book," Kato lied, hating how easy it was becoming to deceive his father. Bekizizwe ruffled his hair affectionately. "That's my boy, always with his nose in a book. Come on, dinner's ready." As they walked to the dining room, Kato's mind raced. He had to find a way to stop Naledi. But how? The next day, Kato got his chance. Bekizizwe had a last-minute meeting at work, and Naledi was out on one of her mysterious errands. Kato was alone in the house. With shaking hands, he opened Naledi's sleek silver laptop. It was password protected, of course. Kato tried a few guesses: her birthday, the wedding date, but nothing worked. Just as he was about to give up, he noticed a yellow sticky note poking out from under the laptop. Peeling it back, he saw a string of numbers and letters. Could it be? Heart pounding, Kato typed in the code. The laptop sprang to life. Kato's eyes widened as he scrolled through Naledi's files. There were dozens of documents with suspicious names: Bekizizwe's schedule, policy details. He clicked on one labeled insurance policy. A PDF opened, full of legal jargon Kato couldn't understand, but a few phrases jumped out at him: accidental death, double indemnity payout of 5 million rand. 5 million rand. Was that what his dad's life was worth? Kato's hands shook as he continued searching. He found a folder labeled Mandela and opened it. Inside were dozens of photos of a man he'd never seen before: tall, dark-haired, with a scar above his left eyebrow. In some photos he was alone. In others he was with Naledi, looking very much like a couple. Kato felt sick. Not only was Naledi planning to hurt his dad, but she was cheating on him too. Suddenly he heard a car in the driveway. Naledi was back. In a panic, Kato closed all the windows and shut down the laptop. He had just managed to replace it exactly as he'd found it when the front door opened. "Kato?" Naledi called. "Are you here?" "Yeah," he called back, trying to keep his voice steady. "Just doing homework." Naledi appeared in the doorway, her eyes narrowing as she took in the scene in the study. "Don't you usually work in your room?" Kato shrugged, avoiding her gaze. "It's quieter here." Naledi stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Well, don't work too hard. Dinner will be ready soon." As she turned to leave, Kato caught a glimpse of her phone screen. She was texting someone. The contact name was simply M. That night, as Kato lay in bed, his mind whirled with everything he had discovered. Naledi and Mandela were planning to kill his dad for the insurance money. They were going to stage some kind of accident after the wedding. Kato felt overwhelmed. He was just a kid. How was he supposed to stop two grown-ups from carrying out their evil plan? And with the wedding just days away, time was running out. He thought about telling his dad everything, but would Bekizizwe believe him? Naledi had spent months painting Kato as a jealous, difficult child. Would his dad trust him over the woman he was about to marry? As he tossed and turned, Kato made a decision. He couldn't just sit back and let this happen. Somehow, someway, he had to stop this wedding. He had to save his dad. With that resolve, Kato finally drifted off to sleep. In his dreams, he saw Naledi and the man from the photos Mandela laughing over a grave. His father's grave. Kato woke up with a start, drenched in sweat. The dim light of dawn was just beginning to creep through his window. In that moment, as the remnants of his nightmare clung to him, Kato knew what he had to do. He would stop this wedding, no matter what it took. Now, back at the wedding, as the elder began to speak, his words washed over Kato in a meaningless jumble. All he could focus on was the growing panic in his chest, the knowledge that he had to do something, say something before it was too late. If anyone can show just cause why this couple cannot lawfully be joined together in matrimony, let them speak now or forever hold their peace. The traditional words hung in the air. This was it. This was Kato's chance. But fear paralyzed him. What if he was wrong? What if no one believed him? What if he ruined everything for nothing? The elder nodded, about to continue. Kato's heart pounded in his ears. It was now or never. Wait. The word burst from Kato's lips before he could stop it. Stop the wedding. A collective gasp rippled through the church. All eyes turned to Kato, who stood trembling, his small voice echoing in the sudden silence. "Kato?" Bekizizwe turned to his son. Confusion and concern etched on his face. "What's wrong, my boy?" Kato's eyes darted from his father to Naledi, who was staring at him with a mixture of shock and barely concealed anger. Baba Kato's voice quavered, but he pressed on. "You can't marry her. She's not who you think she is." Bekizizwe knelt down, placing a gentle hand on Kato's shoulder. "What are you talking about, my son? Are you feeling okay?" Kato shook his head vehemently. "No, Baba, you don't understand. Naledi, she's been lying to you. She's planning something bad." A murmur ran through the crowd. Naledi let out a nervous laugh, her eyes darting between Bekizizwe and the guests. "Oh, sweetie," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I know this is a big change for you. It's okay to feel scared about having a new mother, but this isn't the way to express it." Kato felt a surge of anger at her patronizing tone. "No," he shouted. "That's not it at all. I heard you on the phone with Mandela. I know about the insurance policy. You're planning to hurt Baba." The church fell deathly silent. Bekizizwe's face paled, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Kato," he said, his voice shaking, "that's a very serious accusation. Where did you hear such a thing?" "I overheard her," Baba Kato pleaded, his words tumbling out in a rush. Late at night, she was talking to someone named Mandela. They were talking about money and insurance and how they were going to get rid of you after the wedding. Naledi's laugh was higher pitched now, a note of hysteria creeping in. "Bekizizwe, love, you can't possibly believe this. It's ridiculous. Mandela is my wedding planner. Of course we've been talking about insurance for the ceremony and money for the caterers and flowers." Kato must have misunderstood, but Kato wasn't backing down. "No, that's not true. I saw the insurance policy on your computer. It was for millions of rand if Baba dies. And I found pictures of you with Mandela. He's not just your wedding planner." The crowd was in an uproar now. Guests whispered furiously to each other, some looking scandalized, others concerned. Bekizizwe stood frozen, looking back and forth between his son and his bride-to-be. Naledi's face had lost its color, her composed mask slipping. "Bekizizwe," she said, reaching for his hand, "you know me. You know I would never. This is absurd. Kato is just a child. He doesn't understand what he's saying." Bekizizwe's brow furrowed, clearly torn. "Kato," he said slowly, "these are very serious things you're saying. Are you absolutely sure about what you heard and saw?" Kato nodded vigorously, tears welling in his eyes. "I'm sure, Baba. I wouldn't lie about this. Naledi's been mean to me for months, but only when you're not around. She makes me feel bad all the time. And now she's planning to hurt you. Please, Baba, you have to believe me." Bekizizwe's face was a storm of emotions: confusion, hurt, disbelief. He turned to Naledi, his voice low and strained. "Naledi, is there any truth to this? Any at all?" Naledi's composure cracked. Her eyes darted around the church, taking in the shocked faces of the guests, the stern look of the elder, the pleading eyes of Kato. For a moment, she looked like a cornered animal. Then, in a blink, her demeanor changed. Her eyes hardened, her mouth set in a grim line. "This is ridiculous," she spat. "I don't have to stand here and be accused by a spoiled brat who can't handle sharing his daddy's attention." She turned to the stunned crowd. "I'm sorry you all had to witness this tantrum. Clearly, Kato has some issues we need to address as a family. Bekizizwe, perhaps we should postpone," but Bekizizwe cut her off, his voice quiet but firm. "No, Naledi, I think we need to address this now, because if there's even a shred of truth to what Kato's saying..." Naledi's eyes flashed dangerously. "You can't be serious. You're going to believe the wild imaginings of an 8-year-old over me? Your fiancée? The woman you love?" Bekizizwe's face was troubled. "I love my son too, Naledi, and Kato's never lied to me before. He's not the type to make up stories, especially not something like this." Kato felt a surge of relief. His dad was listening to him. But Naledi wasn't done yet. "This is absurd," she cried, her voice rising. "I've done nothing but love you, Bekizizwe. I've tried to be a mother to Kato, and this is how I'm repaid? With baseless accusations and suspicion?" She turned to Kato, her eyes blazing. "You little brat," she hissed, forgetting herself for a moment. "You've ruined everything." A collective gasp went up from the audience. Bekizizwe's eyes widened in shock at Naledi's outburst. In that moment, he saw a side of her he'd never witnessed before, and it chilled him to the bone. "Naledi," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "what have you done?" Naledi seemed to realize her mistake. She backpedaled quickly, forcing a laugh. "Oh, Bekizizwe, can't you see? The stress. It's all too much." Kato's outburst, these ridiculous accusations. "I just lost my temper for a moment. Surely you can understand." But the damage was done. Bekizizwe took a step back, his eyes never leaving Naledi's face. "No," he said slowly. "No, I don't think I can understand. Because the Naledi I thought I knew would never speak to my son that way, no matter how upset she was." He turned to Kato, kneeling down to look his son in the eye. "Kato, I need you to tell me everything, from the beginning. Don't leave anything out." And so, with all eyes upon him, Kato began to speak. He told his father about Naledi's cold behavior when they were alone, the cruel comments and the physical intimidation. He recounted the overheard phone conversation, the suspicious absences, the secret messages to Mandela. He described finding the insurance policy on Naledi's computer and the photos of her with Mandela. As Kato spoke, Bekizizwe's face grew increasingly pale. The guests listened in stunned silence, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others nodding as if pieces of a puzzle were falling into place. Naledi stood rigid, her eyes darting between Bekizizwe and the exit. As Kato's story unfolded, her composed facade crumbled completely. By the time he finished, she looked like a completely different person from the radiant bride who had walked down the aisle just minutes before. "Is this true?" Bekizizwe asked, his voice heavy with pain and betrayal. "Naledi, look me in the eye and tell me none of this is true." Naledi's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Her eyes, once full of false warmth, now held only cold calculation. In that moment, Bekizizwe saw the truth and it broke his heart. "I think," Bekizizwe said, his voice shaking slightly, "that this wedding is over." A commotion broke out in the church. Guests began to stand, some moving toward the exits, others crowding closer to hear what was happening. In the chaos, Naledi saw her chance. With a snarl of frustration, she turned and bolted down the aisle, her white dress billowing behind her. She pushed past shocked guests, making a beeline for the church doors. "Stop her," someone shouted. But Naledi was quick. She burst through the doors and out into the bright sunlight, leaving behind a scene of utter chaos. The church erupted into chaos as Naledi fled, her white dress billowing behind her like a ghostly apparition. Bekizizwe, still reeling from the shocking revelation, snapped into action. He pulled out his phone with shaking hands and dialed 911. "Yes, hello, I need to report a crime," Bekizizwe said, his voice trembling. "My fiancée, she was planning to kill me for insurance money. She just ran from our wedding. Please, you need to find her." As Bekizizwe spoke to the dispatcher, providing Naledi's description and last known direction, Kato stood rooted to the spot, overwhelmed by the tumultuous events he had set in motion. A mix of relief and anxiety churned in his stomach. He had saved his father, but at what cost? The guests, a moment ago seated in reverent silence for a joyous occasion, now buzzed with shock and speculation. Some rushed outside, hoping to catch a glimpse of the fleeing bride. Others huddled in small groups, whispering furiously and casting furtive glances at Bekizizwe and Kato. Bekizizwe ended the call and turned to his son, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. He knelt down, placing his hands on Kato's shoulders. "Kato," he said, his voice hoarse, "I'm so sorry. I should have listened to you sooner. I should have seen." Kato threw his arms around his father's neck, burying his face in Bekizizwe's shoulder. "It's okay, Baba," he mumbled, his voice muffled. "I'm just glad you're safe." Bekizizwe hugged his son tightly, tears welling in his eyes. For a moment, the chaos around them faded away, and it was just father and son, united against the storm. Their moment was interrupted by the arrival of the police. 2 officers entered the church, their presence immediately commanding attention. The murmur of voices died down as everyone turned to watch. "Mr. Moyo?" one of the officers asked, approaching Bekizizwe and Kato. Bekizizwe stood, keeping one hand on Kato's shoulder. "Yes, that's me. I'm Officer Kajiso. This is my partner, Officer Thando," the policeman said. "We need to ask you some questions about what happened here." As Bekizizwe began recounting the events to the officers, Kato's attention was drawn to a commotion near the church entrance. A tall man with dark hair and a scar above his left eyebrow was trying to push his way inside, looking frantic. Kato's heart leaped into his throat. He recognized the man from the photos he'd seen on Naledi's computer. It was Mandela. Baba, Kato whispered urgently, tugging on Bekizizwe's sleeve. "Baba, that's him. That's Mandela." Bekizizwe's head snapped up, following Kato's gaze. His eyes widened in recognition, remembering the description Kato had given earlier. "Officers," Bekizizwe said quickly, "that man by the door. I think he's involved in this. He's the one my son overheard Naledi talking to on the phone." The officers reacted swiftly. Officer Kajiso stayed with Bekizizwe and Kato, while Officer Thando moved quickly toward Mandela, who was now trying to back out of the church. "Sir, stop right there," Officer Thando called out. Mandela froze for a split second, his eyes darting around like a cornered animal. Then, in a burst of panic, he turned and ran. Officer Thando gave chase, shouting into his radio for backup. The wedding guests watched in stunned silence as the officer disappeared through the church doors in pursuit of the mysterious man. "Mr. Moyo," Officer Kajiso said, his voice calm but authoritative, "I think it would be best if you and your son came down to the station to give a full statement. We'll need to gather all the evidence you have regarding Naledi's plans." Bekizizwe nodded, still looking shell-shocked. "Of course. Whatever you need. Kato, my boy, are you okay to go with us to the police station?" Kato nodded bravely, though his heart was racing. "Yeah, Baba, I want to help." As they prepared to leave, Bekizizwe's best man, Saifo, approached them. "Bekizizwe," he said, placing a comforting hand on his friend's shoulder. "What do you want us to do about all this?" He gestured vaguely at the church full of confused and concerned guests. Bekizizwe ran a hand through his hair, looking overwhelmed. I don't know, Saifo, I guess. Tell everyone to go home. Apologize on my behalf. I can't deal with this right now." Saifo nodded understandingly. "Don't worry about it, man. I'll take care of everything here. You just focus on you and Kato, okay?" Bekizizwe managed a weak smile. "Thanks, Saifo. I don't know what I'd do without you." As Bekizizwe and Kato left the church with Officer Kajiso, they could hear Saifo addressing the crowd, his voice steady and reassuring as he explained the situation and asked everyone to return home. The ride to the police station was surreal. Kato sat in the back of the police car, watching the familiar streets of his hometown pass by in a blur. Everything looked the same, and yet everything had changed. His father sat beside him, uncharacteristically quiet, his eyes unfocused as he stared out the window. At the station, Bekizizwe and Kato were led to a small, plain room with a table and a few chairs. Officer Kajiso assured them it wasn't an interrogation room, just a quiet place where they could talk without interruptions. For the next few hours, Bekizizwe and Kato recounted their experiences with Naledi. Kato described the overheard phone conversations, the cruel treatment when Bekizizwe wasn't around, and his discovery of the insurance policy and photos on Naledi's computer. Bekizizwe, still looking shell-shocked, filled in the gaps with details about his relationship with Naledi, trying to pinpoint when things might have started to go wrong. As they talked, more pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. Naledi had suggested increasing Bekizizwe's life insurance policy just a month after they got engaged, citing concerns about Kato's future if anything were to happen to Bekizizwe. She had also been pushing for them to take up more dangerous hobbies together: rock climbing, skydiving, even swimming with sharks on their honeymoon. "I thought she was just adventurous," Bekizizwe said, his voice hollow. "I never imagined." Kato reached out and took his father's hand, squeezing it reassuringly. Bekizizwe managed a small smile, grateful for his son's unwavering support. As the day wore on, more information trickled in. Officer Thando had managed to apprehend Mandela a few blocks from the church. Under questioning, he had quickly cracked, revealing the full extent of the plan he and Naledi had concocted. Naledi, it turned out, was not even her real name. She was actually Dinio Kumalo, a con artist with a long history of seducing wealthy men and then disappearing with their money. Mandela was her longtime partner, both in crime and in life. They had been pulling these scams for years, but had never attempted anything as ambitious or as deadly as their plan for Becky Zizwi. The insurance policy Kato had discovered was just the tip of the iceberg. Naledi or Dinio had been systematically isolating Becky Zizwi from his friends and family, subtly manipulating him into changing his will to leave everything to her. The plan had been to stage an accident on their honeymoon, collect the insurance money and Becky Zizwi's estate, and then disappear to start a new life together. As the full scope of Naledi's deception became clear, Becky Zizwi seemed to crumple in on himself. "How could I have been so blind?" he whispered, more to himself than to Kato or the officers. "How could I not have seen what was happening?" Officer Kagiso, who had been quietly taking notes, looked up with sympathy. "Mr. Moyo, don't blame yourself. These people are professionals. They've done this before, and they're very good at manipulating others. The important thing is that they didn't succeed, thanks to your son." Becky Zizwi looked at Kato, a mix of pride and lingering guilt in his eyes. "You're right," he said softly. "Kato saved my life today. I wish I had listened to him sooner." Kato, feeling a surge of love for his father, leaned into Becky Zizwi's side. "It's okay, Baba. We're okay now." As the day turned to evening, there was still no sign of Naledi. She seemed to have vanished into thin air after fleeing the church. The police assured Becky Zizwi and Kato that they were doing everything they could to find her, but warned them that she was experienced in disappearing. "We've put out an APB and alerted all local and state law enforcement," Officer Kagiso explained. "We're also monitoring airports, bus stations, and car rental agencies. But I have to be honest with you, she had a head start, and she knows how to cover her tracks." Becky Zizwi nodded wearily. "I understand. Thank you for everything you're doing." As they prepared to leave the station, Officer Kagiso handed Becky Zizwi his card. "If you remember anything else, or if Naledi tries to contact you, please call me immediately. Day or night." Becky Zizwi pocketed the card, then turned to Kato. "Ready to go home, my boy?" Kato nodded, suddenly feeling the weight of the day's events. He was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. The drive home was quiet, both father and son lost in their thoughts. As they pulled into their driveway, Becky Zizwi turned off the engine but made no move to get out of the car. "Kato," he said softly, turning to face his son. "I owe you an apology, a big one." Kato looked at his father, surprised. "For what, Baba?" Becky Zizwi sighed heavily. "For not listening to you, for not seeing how Naledi was treating you, for putting you in danger by bringing that woman into our lives." Kato was quiet for a moment, considering his father's words. Then, with a wisdom beyond his years, he said, "Baba, you were just trying to be happy. And make us happy. You couldn't have known what Naledi was really like." Becky Zizwi's eyes welled with tears. "But I should have seen how she was affecting you. I should have noticed that you weren't happy." Kato reached out and took his father's hand. "I didn't want to ruin things for you. You seemed so happy with her. I thought maybe I was the problem." Becky Zizwi's heart broke at his son's words. He pulled Kato into a fierce hug, mindless of the awkward angle across the car seats. "Never, Kato. You could never be the problem. You're the best thing in my life, and I'm so sorry if I ever made you doubt that." They sat there for a long moment, holding each other, letting the tears flow freely. It was a catharsis, washing away the pain and fear of the past months. Finally, Becky Zizwi pulled back, wiping his eyes. "What do you say we go inside and order a ridiculous amount of pizza? I think we've earned it." Kato managed a small smile. "Can we get stuffed crust?" Becky Zizwi laughed, the sound a bit watery but genuine. "My boy, after today you can have whatever kind of pizza you want." As they walked into the house, both Becky Zizwi and Kato felt a weight lift from their shoulders. The specter of Naledi Dinio still loomed, but they would face that together. For now, they were home. They were safe. And they had each other. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Fiancée and Kato's lives were turned upside down as they dealt with the aftermath of Naledi's deception. There were more interviews with the police, meetings with lawyers to untangle the legal mess Naledi had created, and endless calls from friends, family, and even reporters seeking details about the wedding day drama. Fiancée did his best to shield Kato from the worst of it, but there was no escaping the reality of their situation. Naledi remained at large, seemingly having vanished into thin air. The police kept Fiancée updated on their search, but as the days turned into weeks, hope of finding her began to fade. Mandela, on the other hand, was facing the full force of the law. In exchange for a plea deal, he had provided a wealth of information about Naledi's past cons and their network of associates. His testimony painted a picture of a sophisticated criminal operation that had been operating for years, leaving a trail of broken hearts and empty bank accounts across the country. For Kato, the aftermath of the wedding day was a mix of relief and anxiety. He was glad that his father was safe and that Naledi was out of their lives, but he couldn't shake the fear that she might return someday to seek revenge. Fiancée noticed his son's unease and did his best to reassure him. He installed a new security system in their home, complete with cameras and motion sensors. He also made sure that Kato knew he could come to him with any concerns, no matter how small they might seem. "We're a team," my boy Fiancée would say, ruffling Kato's hair affectionately. "You and me against the world, remember." Kato would nod, feeling a little bit safer each time his father reaffirmed their bond. As the weeks passed, life slowly began to return to a semblance of normalcy. Fiancée threw himself into his work, taking on extra projects to keep his mind occupied. Kato focused on school, finding comfort in the familiar routine of classes and homework. One Saturday morning, about a month after the ill-fated wedding, Fiancée and Kato were having breakfast when the doorbell rang. Fiancée tensed, still wary of unexpected visitors, but relaxed when he saw Saifo, his best man, through the peephole. "Hey man," Saifo said as Fiancée opened the door. "How are you guys holding up?" Fiancée managed a tired smile. "We're hanging in there. Come on in." Saifo followed Fiancée to the kitchen, where Kato was finishing his cereal. "Hey little man," Saifo said, giving Kato a fist bump. "You doing okay?" Kato nodded, returning the fist bump with a small smile. He had always liked Saifo, who treated him like a person rather than just a kid. "So," Saifo said, accepting a cup of coffee from Fiancée, "I actually came by for a reason. The guys and I have been talking, and we think it's time for you two to get out of the house for a bit. What do you say to a camping trip next weekend?" Fiancée hesitated, glancing at Kato. "I don't know, Saifo. With everything that's happened." "That's exactly why you need this," Saifo insisted. "Just a few days away from all this." He gestured vaguely around the kitchen. "No phones, no reporters, no lawyers. Just us guys, some tents, and the great outdoors." Kato perked up at the idea. "Can we go fishing?" he asked, a spark of excitement in his eyes that Fiancée hadn't seen in weeks. Saifo grinned. "You bet, my boy. We'll catch enough fish to feed an army." Fiancée looked at his son's hopeful face and felt something loosen in his chest. Maybe this was exactly what they needed, a chance to breathe, to remember what life was like before Naledi came into their world. "All right," he said, smiling as Kato's face lit up. "Let's do it." The camping trip turned out to be exactly what Fiancée and Kato needed. Away from the constant reminders of Naledi's betrayal, they found themselves relaxing for the first time in months. They spent their days hiking, fishing, and swapping stories around the campfire. Kato delighted in learning how to set up a tent and roast the perfect marshmallow, while Fiancée rediscovered the simple joy of watching his son laugh and play without a care in the world. On their last night in the woods, as they sat around the dying embers of their campfire, Fiancée pulled Kato close. "Thank you, my boy," he said softly. Kato looked up at his father, confused. "For what, Baba?" Fiancée smiled, his eyes reflecting the flickering firelight. "For being you. For being brave when I couldn't see what was happening. For saving us both." Kato snuggled closer to his father, feeling safe and loved. "We saved each other, Baba," he said wisely. As they drove home the next day, both Fiancée and Kato felt renewed. The shadow of Naledi still loomed in the background, but it no longer seemed all-consuming. They had weathered the storm together and come out stronger for it. Life continued to move forward. Kato started a new school year, throwing himself into his studies and making new friends. Bekizizwe, with the encouragement of his therapist, began to cautiously dip his toes back into the dating pool, though he was understandably wary and took things very slowly. Then, 6 months after the wedding that wasn't, everything changed again. It was a crisp autumn afternoon when Officer Kajiso showed up at their door, his face grave. "Mr. Moyo," he said as Bekizizwe invited him in, "we found Naledi." Bekizizwe's heart raced. "You've arrested her?" Officer Kajiso shook his head. "No, sir. I'm afraid we found her body in a motel room just outside of Johannesburg. It appears she took her own life." The news hit Bekizizwe like a physical blow. He stumbled back, steadying himself against the wall. "She's dead," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Officer Kajiso nodded solemnly. "Yes, sir. We believe she'd been there for a few days." There was a note. At that moment, Kato came bounding down the stairs, stopping short when he saw the police officer. "Baba?" he asked, his voice tinged with worry. Bekizizwe turned to his son, his face pale. "Kato, my boy. Why don't you go to your room for a bit? I need to talk to Officer Kajiso." Kato hesitated, his eyes darting between his father and the officer. "Is it about Naledi?" he asked softly. Bekizizwe sighed, realizing there was no point in hiding the truth from his perceptive son. "Yes, it is. Come here, my boy. We should talk about this together." As they sat in the living room, Officer Kajiso gently explained the situation, careful to spare Kato the more distressing details. Naledi, or Dinio, as she was truly named, had been on the run for months, always staying one step ahead of the law. But the pressure had taken its toll. In her note, Officer Kajiso said, his voice softening, she expressed remorse for what she'd done. She said she couldn't live with the guilt anymore. Bekizizwe sat in stunned silence, his arm around Kato's shoulders. The boy looked up at his father, his young face etched with concern. "Are you okay, Baba?" Bekizizwe managed a weak smile. "I don't know, my boy. It's a lot to process." After Officer Kajiso left, promising to keep them updated on any developments, Bekizizwe and Kato sat together on the couch, both lost in thought. Kato then asked, "Do you think she really felt bad about what she did?" Bekizizwe sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know, my boy. People are complicated. Sometimes they do bad things and then regret them later. But what's important is that we learn from this and move forward." The news of Naledi's death marked a turning point for Bekizizwe and Kato. While it brought a sense of closure, it also stirred up complex emotions that took time to process. They attended counseling sessions together, learning to navigate their feelings and strengthen their bond even further. As the months passed, life settled into a new normal. Bekizizwe threw himself into being the best father he could be, cherishing every moment with Kato. He also rekindled old friendships that had fallen by the wayside during his relationship with Naledi, rebuilding his support network. Kato, for his part, blossomed. The weight of secrecy and fear lifted from his young shoulders. He became more outgoing at school and excelled in his studies. He developed a passion for detective novels, often joking that he had a head start in the mystery-solving department. On the one-year anniversary of the ill-fated wedding day, Bekizizwe and Kato decided to start a new tradition. They packed a picnic and drove to a beautiful nature reserve, spending the day hiking, fishing, and simply enjoying each other's company. As they sat by a crystal-clear lake, watching the sunset, Bekizizwe turned to his son. "You know, Kato, I've been thinking a lot about what happened last year." Kato looked up, curious. "Yeah?" Bekizizwe nodded, his eyes reflecting the golden light of the setting sun. "I realized something important. What Naledi did was terrible, but in a way it taught me the most valuable lesson of my life." "What's that, Baba?" Kato asked. Bekizizwe smiled, ruffling Kato's hair affectionately. "It taught me that the most important relationship in my life, the one I should always prioritize, is right here." He poked Kato gently in the chest. "You and me, my boy. We're a team, and nothing's ever going to change that." Kato beamed, throwing his arms around his father in a tight hug. I love you, Baba, he mumbled into Bekizizwi's chest. I love you too, my boy, Bekizizwi replied, his voice thick with emotion. More than you'll ever know. As they packed up their picnic and headed home, both father and son felt a sense of peace settle over them. The past year had been a roller coaster of emotions, filled with betrayal, fear, and uncertainty. But it had also strengthened their bond in ways they never could have imagined. They had weathered the storm together, emerging stronger and closer than ever. And as they drove home, the setting sun painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, both Bekizizwi and Kato knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The story of the brave boy who stopped his dad's wedding had become a tale of resilience, love, and the unbreakable bond between a father and son. It was a reminder that sometimes the happiest endings come not from fairy tale weddings but from the simple, profound love of family. As they pulled into their driveway, Bekizizwi looked over at Kato, who had fallen asleep during the drive. He smiled, feeling a wave of gratitude wash over him. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear with Kato by his side. Bekizizwi knew they could handle anything life threw their way. And so, as the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Bekizizwi carried his sleeping son into the house, ready to face whatever tomorrow might bring together. Kato's courage and determination to do what was right not only changed his father's life but also sent shockwaves through their entire community. By speaking up and revealing the truth about his father's fiancée, Kato showed the power of bravery, no matter how young you are. His actions uncovered hidden truths, healed relationships, and reminded everyone that honesty and love should always come first. In this powerful and heart-wrenching story, we are reminded of the importance of truth, courage, and the unbreakable bond between family. The bravery of young Kato, who risked everything to protect his father from a dangerous woman, is nothing short of inspiring. He demonstrated that no matter how young or small we may be, doing what is right can have a lasting impact, even when it's hard to stand up and speak the truth. O Allah, the most merciful and compassionate, we turn to you with gratitude for the blessings of truth, love, and family. We ask you to grant us the strength and courage to stand for what is right, just as Kato did. Protect us from harm and deceit, and guide us on the path of righteousness. Let our hearts be filled with your light and wisdom, so we may always act with integrity, even when it is difficult. Bless our families with peace, love, and unity, and protect us from those who wish to cause harm. In your infinite mercy, heal our wounds and guide us towards forgiveness and understanding. Amin. May we find comfort and hope in your presence, and may our actions always reflect the love and truth you have placed within us.